This is right, Arab.
Hello and welcome to this WION Live Broadcast from Washington, D.C. I'm Nina Maria Potts. Our top focus in the bulletin remains on the talks that are underway in Kandahar for the formation of a Taliban government. We'll get you all the details. First, the headlines. Frantic discussions are underway in Kandahar as the Taliban is set to form its government in the coming week. Sources indicating that the Taliban's Mullah Abdul Ghani Bardar could lead the new Afghan government as head of the Executive Council. Women in the Afghan capital, Kabul, protest for their rights under Taliban rule, demanding participation in the new government. The death toll from flash floods after Hurricane Ida pummeled U.S. cities up the East Coast rises to 46. New York witnessed historic rains, flooding basements with water, turning freeways and boulevards into rivers with submerged cars. New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says that an ISIS-inspired Sri Lankan national stabbed 6 people at an Auckland supermarket. The assailant was under surveillance and was shot dead by the police. Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga will step down after just a year in office, with many of the country's big cities still under a COVID state of emergency. Suga's approval rating stands below 30%. It's a crucial week for the Taliban ahead. Amid many uncertainties, the Taliban is set to form the new Afghan government. The group, which was declared a terror outfit by the United Nations, will now have to transform into a governing power. Reports suggest that the announcement will come after Friday prayers. The Taliban has promised a softer brand of rule than before. Whether it will follow through or not remains to be seen. The international community has adopted the wait-and-watch rule as it mulls recognising the Taliban. Talks are underway in Kandahar. The latest reports coming in suggest that Mullah Abdul Ghani Bardar, who is a co-founder of the Taliban, is expected to be the head of the Executive Council. This council will be functioning under the Emir. Sheikh Haibatullah will be the supreme authority of the new Islamic government. Key positions are expected to be given to Sirajuddin Haqqani, another deputy and an influential operations leader within the movement. Along with him, Malawi Muhammad Yaqub, who is the son of the Taliban movement's founder, Mullah Muhammad Omar, who will also be given a role in the government. So far, the Taliban have made the following appointments. They have named a governor for Kabul, a mayor for Kabul, a governor for Nangarhar, a governor for Khost, also appointed the head of the Sports Federation and a minister for higher education. Officials running the Ministry of Public Health and the Central Bank have also been named. Many Kabul residents have expressed fears about the country's future. While some are concerned about employment opportunities, some fear they won't have access to education. Experts are hoping for an inclusive government, but the Taliban has not yet confirmed anything. What we know for certain is that the Taliban is taking over a country ravaged on multiple fronts: war, food shortages, drought, a sinking currency, rising inflation. There's a long list the Taliban will have to deal with. More than a third of the population lives on less than $2 a day. Banks were closed after the takeover. They've now been ordered to reopen. But that means hours of queuing, thanks to strict weekly limits on cash withdrawals. The country also faces the loss of billions of dollars in foreign aid. And many help groups have halted their aid since the US troops withdrawal. The Taliban has promised that the economic hardships will ease once the new government is formed. But only time will tell. For more on the Taliban government formation and the For more on the Taliban government formation and the Afghanistan crisis, we have with us Mr. Omar Samad, former Afghanistan ambassador to France and Canada, who is joining us from Washington, D.C. Mr. Samad has also served as a senior advisor to Dr. Abdullah, the former chief executive of Afghanistan. Mr. Omar Samad, welcome to WION. The Taliban is expected to announce the new government next week amid global attention and scrutiny. What can you tell us about today's Taliban, so to speak?
Well, today's Taliban obviously are trying to portray a different face, different rhetoric, different messaging, new PR, and new messaging both to Afghans as well as to regional players and countries and the international community as a whole. To what extent the rhetoric and the words match actions will be tested over the next few days. The first test is going to be the formation of the government, as you mentioned in your report. But there are many others. It has to do with governance. It has to do with where authority resides. It has to do with criteria about competence and skill sets. They will need technocrats and bureaucrats to run the government. It also has to do with how they treat women and minorities and other groups in society, to what extent they are inclusive, and how they are going to build relationships within Afghanistan across communities, but also in our neighborhood, in the region in particular, knowing that the West now has left. The money is dried up, and that it will take a bit of time to rebuild those connections.
We've heard the Taliban make statements about trusting the new regime as it tries to rebuild the economy and attract foreign investment. Do you think the new government will be able to revive the economy?
It's going to be very tough, a huge challenge to revive the economy. The economy was not doing well to begin with. When Mr. Ashraf Ghani left, he left already a poor country where 90% of the population, more or less, lived on less than $2 a day. Afghanistan, 70% was dependent on foreign aid. The salaries of teachers and military and police and others were being paid from foreign donors' money. So already we had huge problems. COVID obviously added to that, displacement also. Now, for the fact that we haven't had a functioning government for 3 weeks and the international community has frozen assets, obviously the situation is dire. The Taliban will need technical assistance, professional assistance, technocratic assistance, managerial assistance. They would need these skill sets in order to be able to revive. But at the same time, an economy needs investment, internal and external investment. It needs trade. It needs transport and transit.
Well, taking over a country by force is one thing and governing it is another challenge. How do you think the Taliban is going to tackle the resistance in Panjshir as well as terror threats in the country?
Well, the Panjshir issue is an immediate issue. The Taliban originally said that they wanted to resolve this through talks. They want to resolve this through talks, but over the past 48 hours, we've been witness to heavy fighting in and around Panjshir, in the vicinity of Panjshir and other regions and provinces as well. We have to see exactly what the result of this fighting will be. Either the resistance will grow and become more powerful, or it will weaken. Whatever happens, I think it needs to, at some point, lead to meaningful negotiations between the Taliban and the leadership in the Panjshir. As far as terrorist groups are concerned, where the Taliban have taken a very clear position against ISKP, and they have made pledges going back to 2020 to the United States and to the international community that they will not allow groups such as Al-Qaeda to operate out of Afghanistan and be a threat to the international community. So we have to watch, and we have to hold them responsible for their words as well as their actions.
Well, coming back to women's rights, which you mentioned earlier, the Taliban is projecting a more tolerant or moderate image and has allowed women to go to university while banning co-education. Do you think women will get any role in governance?
I think women will get roles in government, and they will have access to education, segregated, as you mentioned, under what the Taliban describe as Islamic law. I don't, at this stage, expect a high-level female appointment, meaning the Taliban may not agree at this stage to have, for example, a female minister or governor. But this is an issue that has to be discussed with them, and hoping that over time they will loosen their restrictions and they will be amenable to having women reach high office postings. But the fact that the Taliban shows some flexibility, in terms of women working and having access to education is a plus. Let's hope that they maintain that pledge to the Afghan women.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Samad. That was Mr. Omar Samad, a former ambassador to France and Canada, joining us live on WION from Washington, D.C. After the Al-Qaeda terror group congratulated the Taliban and called for the liberation of so-called Islamic lands, Al-Qaeda fighters have reportedly entered the ranks of the Taliban in their operation to capture the rebel Afghan province of Panjshir. Panjshir is the last province resisting rule by the Taliban, more than 2 weeks after the hardline Islamists seized power. Taliban forces and fighters loyal to local leader Ahmad Massoud clashed in Afghanistan's Panjshir Valley. Now, a representative of the National Resistance Front of Afghanistan has reportedly said that, and I quote, Al-Qaeda militant units are joining the Taliban in attacking Panjshir. This is after peace talks launched last week had failed. And the Taliban launched a military operation against the Panjshir resistance. Hours after the Taliban declared full independence for Afghanistan, Al-Qaeda put out a detailed statement saying what has been one of its long-standing calls, the liberation of Islamic lands, referring to regions such as Palestine, the Levant, Somalia, Yemen and Kashmir. The renewed proclamation by Al-Qaeda alarmed South Asia and the international community. The anti-Taliban forces have been holding out in the steep valley, where attacks from outside are difficult. The Panjshir resistance spokesperson has asserted that the movement is committed to a peaceful settlement, but the rebel group also says that it has full control of all passes and entry points. The Taliban have already lost around 350 people in the clashes over the last 2 days, and 35 more fighters have been captured. A British-born man who was a member of a team of Islamic State terrorists in Syria called the Beatles and accused of beheading American hostages has pled guilty. London-born Alexander Coty pled guilty to 8 U.S. criminal charges, including lethal hostage-taking and conspiracy to support terrorists. Coty is one of the 2 Islamic State members who were held in Iraq by the U.S. military before being flown to the United States to face trial on terrorism charges.
A British-born member of the Islamic State has pled guilty in a U.S. court to 8 criminal charges, including lethal hostage-taking and conspiracy to support terrorists. Alexander Coty is one of 2 British-born jihadists held in Iraq by U.S. military and flown to the United States to face trial on terrorism charges. Coty belonged to a 4-member Islamic State cell nicknamed the Beatles because of their British accents. Before a U.S. district judge, Coty pled guilty to the murders of 2 aid workers, as well as journalists Stephen Sotloff and James Foley.
Think about who made the decision to bomb Iraq recently.
In 2014, Islamic State had released a video claiming to show Foley's beheading.
Of your country.
The charges against Coty carry potential death sentences, but U.S. authorities say American prosecutors will not seek the death penalty. Instead, the Justice Department said Coty has agreed to life imprisonment without parole. Under a tentative agreement between the U.S. and British authorities, he could also be transferred to Britain after 15 years to serve time there. The Beatles' cell was suspected of taking part in graphic videos that IS posted online, showing beheadings of foreign hostages. Both Coty and the other member in detention have since had their UK citizenship withdrawn.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has come under attack from opposition leaders in a heated 2-hour French language debate. Opposition leaders said that Trudeau had no business calling an election during a COVID-19 pandemic. Last month, Trudeau had called for September snap polls, saying that he needed a new mandate to ensure voters approved of his government's plan to recover from the pandemic. Trudeau's Liberals had a minority government and are aiming to come back to power with a majority this time. Surveys, however, show that it could be a neck-and-neck fight between the Liberals and the Conservatives. Next week, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation will host an English and French language debate.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau came under concerted fire on Thursday for calling an election during the COVID-19 pandemic. During a heated 2-hour debate in Montreal, Trudeau's 3 opponents told him now was not the time for a vote. Trudeau triggered the election last month, just 2 years into a 4-year mandate, saying Canadians needed to decide whether the Liberal government was right to spend billions of dollars to protect people and businesses from the pandemic. Trudeau's Liberals currently lead a minority government, which leaves them dependent on other parties to govern.
Yes, we can work to do big things during a pandemic, but we need a clear mandate, not just for a government, but a parliament, to understand what Canadians want for the next years.
Trudeau's gamble could, however, backfire when voters go to the polls at the end of the month. Surveys show that the Liberals' early big lead has vanished, leaving them neck and neck with the Conservatives. Liberal insiders put it down to public unhappiness with the vote and fatigue with Trudeau, who's been in power since 2015. Thursday's debate also focused on Quebec matters, including a 2019 law on secularism, which bans public employees from wearing religious symbols at work. Trudeau said he would be willing to challenge the law at the federal level, while Conservative leader Erin O'Toole made clear that as Prime Minister, he would not act.
And that's all we have time for on today's WION Live broadcast from Washington, D.C. For more global news and updates, stay tuned to WION. World is one.
This is right, Arab.